Today, I'm going to share with you my ultimate tiramisu recipe. Now, you're going to ask, what makes this the ultimate tiramisu? Well, it's two things. Firstly, it's flavor. This is a recipe designed around great coffee flavor. That's got to be front and center in this whole thing. But it's not just flavor, it's texture too. We've kind of optimized the most enjoyable eating experience alongside the best possible flavors. I'm not going to lie to you. This recipe gets a bit nerdy in a whole bunch of places. And you might find yourself asking, do I really need to do this step? Do you not care about flavor? Of course you do. Now, some of it is of course optional, but I promise you, if you go to the trouble of doing these steps, you will be handsomely rewarded. Now, this whole recipe, tiramisu, is wonderful because it's pretty scalable. You can make a little portion or a massive one. We're going to work on the idea that a kind of 4 biscuit portion is good for one person. Today, we're going to use 32 biscuits. That's enough for 8 people, and everything scales very nicely. To make it even easier, in the description there's a link to a calculator that we've made. You go to the website and you tell it how many biscuits you want to use based on either how many people you want to make it for or how big your dish is, if you want to check that too. And it will then spit out the whole recipe, all of the information you need, all the nerdy details included to make your life as easy as possible. And we've included the nutritional information for a single portion in the description down below, just to be completist about this whole thing. The way it's going to work is we're going to run through the key ingredients and the preparation steps involved in those things. We'll go through the build, and at the end of this, I get to eat some tiramisu. Let's start with eggs. Your ratio for this part is going to be 1 egg yolk to 4 biscuits. So today, for 32 biscuits, 8 egg yolks. We're going to cook them in a sous vide at 60 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. That's very precise, you might say. Why would you do that? Do I have to do that? Well, what we were trying to do initially was just pasteurize the egg yolks so that children, pregnant people, could enjoy this dessert. Turns out, though, that cooking them like this sort of impacts the gelling properties of egg yolks, and it really improves the finished texture of the mascarpone cream. So it is 100% worth the pain and suffering of doing this. Get it up to temp, throw it in and cook it for 30 minutes. When it's done, take it out and cool it down. You don't want to use it warm in the next step. You can drop it in an ice bath if you're in a hurry, or just let it cool down in the fridge. But what if you don't have a sous vide circulator? Well, a very smart person in my Patreon Discord server came up with an idea. They said, what if you used a temperature-controlled kettle? If you set it to the target temperature and put it in hold mode, would it work? We tested it. Yes, I have to set it a little bit hotter, like 62 to hit 60 in terms of the water, but it totally works. Should you do this? I am not advising you to put eggs in your nice pouring kettle. I'm not recommending that. And I'm saying if you did, I wouldn't use a Ziploc bag. I'd buy a proper sous vide vacuum seal bag that's very robust and strong. I'm not recommending you do it, but it would work if you did do it, but I'm not recommending that you do it. But it does work. While your eggs are cooking, let's take on the coffee side of things. Now, coffee is probably the most expensive ingredient in this whole recipe, and we are very concerned with not wasting any of it. And so the scaling comes back in, and we're going to recommend a very specific amount of ground coffee to start with that you're going to work with per biscuit. And everything is going to have some maths involved, and it's going to be magical and wonderful. Because the coffee flavor, the coffee strength intensity is really, really fundamentally important to this whole thing. This does mean this recipe works best if you have access to an espresso machine, because you're going to be making some pretty strong coffee. It does work with an Aeropress. It's the best alternative that we've found, but something like a pour over probably isn't going to work. Let's get into the science of this, because what we're chasing is a liquid that we're going to dunk our biscuits in that is 6% strength in terms of coffee. Now, we've made a whole video about strength. It's a super interesting topic. It's a word that's misused all the time, but it's a very specific kind of intensity of flavor that we need to make the final dessert taste really good. You can, if you've got a fancy refractometer, just measure it and test it yourself, but most people don't have a refractometer. How can they get to 6% strength? Well, we did the maths. We worked it out, and we have a very, very neat solution. So here's how it's going to work. For each biscuit, it's going to be about 4.5 grams of ground coffee. And the good news is that means a single portion is going to use 18 grams of ground coffee, a typical double espresso dose. You're going to brew your espresso exactly how you like to brew it. This is key. You can brew a 1-to-2 ratio if you really like that. If your coffee tastes great that way, that's good. If you like to pull longer shots, say 1-to-3 ratios, do that too. It kind of doesn't matter, because what we're going to do at the end of this, when we brew the right amount of coffee for the right number of biscuits, is dilute the coffee liquid that we have to a fixed endpoint. And that amount of liquid is going to be 15 grams of liquid per biscuit. In the case of our recipe, we've got 32 biscuits. We're going to use 144 grams of ground coffee, and we need to sort of make that espresso liquid up to 480 mils of finished coffee liquid. Our espresso will get us some of the way, and we're going to use cold water to dilute the rest of the way. If you brew your espresso properly, however you brew it, you will get to pretty much 6% strength doing it this way. Trust me on that. I did say you could brew this with an Aeropress. It is tricky. We're going to brew a really high ratio, right? So let's say we've got 144 grams of ground coffee to brew for this recipe. We're going to brew batches of 40 grams of ground coffee to 200 grams of hot water. That's a very high ratio. We're going to need to grind finer than you might do for an Aeropress, not all the way down at espresso, but a little bit finer. We're going to agitate at 2 minutes and 4 minutes and press at 6 minutes. And that will get you about 120 grams out. You will have, if you're doing 144 grams, 3 batches of 40 grams to 200, and then you have 1 remaining batch of 24 grams to 120 grams of water. Press that all out and you'll be very close, but just slightly under that 15 grams of biscuit, that 480 mils that we're chasing. So again, just top it up with cold water. It won't be quite as strong. It'll be like 5% strength, 5.5 maybe on a good day, but it will taste fantastic. But what about the coffee that you should be using? Well, don't use something fancy and complex. That isn't the point. And actually, I would strongly recommend using decaf. Remember, we're basically working on a double espresso's worth of coffee per person. If you're serving a double espresso to someone at like 9 at night at the end of a lovely dinner, they're not going to, sleep very well. But if you use decaf, well, again, serve it to kids, to pregnant people. Have a great time. Have delicious coffee flavor with no compromises whatsoever. So for this one, we would take a classic, well-roasted, very tasty, high-quality decaf espresso blend, and we would use that in both the Aeropress and the espresso machine. Trust me, this is what decaf is made for. Now for this recipe, we would recommend adding a little bit of salt. Adding the right amount of salt here is actually pretty tricky. We would recommend using a saline solution, an 80-20 water to salt ratio. So if you took 5 grams of salt and added 20 grams of boiling water, mixed it together, you'd have 25 grams of 80-20 saline. We're going to say 1 drop of saline per 50 mils of finished coffee liquid. So for our 480 mils, I would do 9 drops. Don't worry about going to a 10th drop. Just go with 9. You could try to add the correct amount of salt, but that's really hard to do without using saline solutions. You're going to really struggle to be accurate. This is 0.75 grams of salt. I don't trust most scales to do 0.75 grams accurately. This will be accurate and repeatable. That is a gamble. I don't want you to ruin your dessert by adding too much salt by mistake. That's why I'm such a big fan of the saline, and it's also useful for loads of other stuff, especially if you're into cocktails. It lasts forever. Get a little dropper kit, leave it lying around. I promise you, it's very useful. And actually, we did make a whole video about the magic of salt in coffee, if you want to check that out. It's time to make the mascarpone cream. This step is all about texture. That's so important. So we've got our sous vide eggs. We've got some cane sugar here. That was our preference in testing. The sweetness level, you can dial it up or down. I would say what we recommend here is kind of universally appealing. Some people will say too sweet. Some will say not sweet enough. But I would say most people will say, oh, that's delicious. I'm going to use a hand whisk today. We're going to use that on the lowest setting here. You could totally use a stand mixer. They tend to run a little slower at the slower setting, so I'd be more of a medium speed here. You'll see when I get to whisking. And we're going to whisk at this low speed for 4 to 5 minutes. So obviously you'll see as you whisk, there'll be a color change and there'll be an increase in volume. It's hard to tell you exactly what the volume increase is. You're just looking for that obvious kind of thickening towards the end of 4 to 5 minutes, and then you're good to go. And it's going to be time to add the mascarpone. Now, this is important. We're going to add this in 3 batches, and we're going to mix until just combined. We don't want to ruin too much of the nice foam that we've created here. And at the end of that, you'll see it'll be kind of halfway between matte and gloss, and it will hold soft peaks. And it doesn't need to be completely perfectly mixed, just pretty much there. And so now we have everything we need to assemble the final thing. Coffee's done. Mascarpone cream's done. We've got our biscuits. Now, I would recommend store-bought. I would recommend maybe a couple of different brands as kind of great biscuits. If you want to make your own, I guess you can. I wouldn't recommend it. And if you do, I would run a second kind of dehydration bake to get them as close to zero moisture as possible. Otherwise, with a good dose of coffee, they just get a little bit too wet in my experience. So, perfect dosing. We're going to get 15 grams of coffee in per biscuit because that gives you the nicest texture, the nicest intensity of flavor. To do that, we're going to do it in 2 stages because this is a 2-layer build. We're going to pour half the coffee, exactly, that's 240 mils, into the bowl. With your store-bought biscuits, generally there is a sugar-covered side and a non-sugar-covered side. When it comes to consistent, accurate dunking, we're going to dunk the non-sugar side only. When we put it in the tray, we're going to put it in upside down so that gravity helps disperse the coffee evenly through the whole biscuit. You're looking for a relatively short single dunk. Let's get this first layer done. To make sure that everything is perfectly distributed, the remaining coffee we're just going to paint on so that we know we've got exactly the right amount of coffee into the right amount of biscuits. As you paint, start with the ones that you dunked last first. And then we're going to spread a nice even layer of about half of the mascarpone cream. Very easy. This is not a dessert all about how it looks, this is a dessert about how it tastes. But I would say that. And then of course we know exactly how much coffee we need. That's the amount that's left. It's going to go into our second layer of biscuits. We're just going to repeat the process. And again, just brush the remainder on. And then put the last of the mascarpone on top. Then into the fridge, a minimum of 8 hours. I would say 24 hours is great, 48 hours also great. If you're looking to eat leftovers the next day, wouldn't go more than 48 hours before serving it the first time. In the fridge it'll set up, and then when you're ready to eat it, you bring it back out. And through the magic of having made one of these yesterday, we can now proceed and finish this thing off. Now, when it comes to cocoa powder, you want to buy something ideally sustainable, traceably sourced, and you want it to be no darker in color than the coffee that you're using, the ground coffee color. I think it's a good guide there. And then just give it a nice even layer across the whole thing. Make it beautiful. And then it's ready to serve. Look, in my experience, the first one out, it's never the most pretty. It's the most difficult one to get out. Don't stress. Just, it's going to be delicious however it looks. You could get a big spoon and just scoop and slap it out. That's the joy of tiramisu. It's eating time. And would you believe I have tasted, I don't know how many tiramisus, still get excited to eat this. Let's have a taste. So good. The coffee's there. It's balanced, but it's still really pleasant. And it comes through in the finish just really nicely. But the texture, the biscuit has enough texture. It's not soggy and wet. It adds a kind of cakiness. The cream is just so good. Sweetness is balanced, but it's really, really all about that coffee. Oh, it's delicious. You can tell the coffee in there is high quality. You can tell it's good, but it's this wonderfully balanced flavor where it's like Coca-Cola. It doesn't taste of the individual components. It just tastes of glorious tiramisu. Oh, sorry. Just one more before I move on. This was worth the pain of development and endless tiramisus. I really hope you make this and enjoy it. One quick thing before I go, I do want to tell you about this. This is the last of the weird coffee person designs that we're going to do. This one was done by Sebastian Aboud. We love it. It's available as a print and on some select garments too. So if you want to grab the last of this series, of the series that will ever be made, the final weird coffee person print and tee and hoodie and sweatshirt, link in the description down below. But now I want to hear from you down in the comments below. Did you try this? Will you try this? How did it go? What worked? What didn't work? What were the reactions from the people that you served it to? Did you enjoy it? How would you change it? I'd love to hear any and all thoughts from you down in the comments below. But for now, I will say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.